In class, she would throw books at me when I wasn't looking or place a thumbtack on my chair. One day I placed several thumbtacks on her chair. She sat down and jumped up screaming like a banshee. She stood there looking around at the entire class and screamed, "Who did that?" The frightened classroom didn't have to say my name. I was busted the moment they all turned to look at me. That's when Janice threatened to beat me up after school. She wasn't fooling around. I had seen her beat a guy to a bloody pulp in the school bathroom. Janice could fight like a dude. She was tough, probably too tough for me to handle. Seated several rows away, she stared at me while pounding her fist in the palm of her hand. Then, from left to right, she slowly drew her fingers across her throat, indicating my doom. She was dead serious about hurting me, and I didn't doubt it. In general rule in the culture was never to strike a female under any circumstances, but Janice was no ordinary girl. She could fight. At that moment, she frightened me so much that my mouth became dry and my heart jumped up in my throat. To further intimidate me, Janice started acting as if she was about to rush over and attack me. Since I wasn't packing my trusty butter knife or a set of brass knuckles, when I looked up at the clock, it was 2:45 p.m. School was about to end, and Janice had dozed off. It was now or never. I eased out of my chair and circled around behind where she sat. Unmanly or not, I was on Janice like a wild man, knocking her and the chair to the floor. Fearful she would get back up, I was about to crown her with the chair when the teacher caught a hold of it in midair. To the amazement of the class, and me as well, Janice stayed on the floor crying. For the first time I saw her as a girl, not as a bully or a beast. She was human after all. Though I felt a sense of remorse, I knew the fight was far from over. Janice had two brothers at school, Vincent and an older brother, Arthur. I later learned that the two brothers agreed that Vincent would restore their sister's honor. Being bigger and taller, he bragged to classmates about what he was going to do. It was on the daycare's playground where I ran into Vincent and his stocky friend Frank. He gestured to me to come over to where they were standing. It meant only one thing. I was taking a risk because no one was around to intercede if they both attacked me or if I was on the losing end. As I approached, Vincent started taking off his sweater. When his face was completely covered, his arms held high in the air underneath the sweatshirt, I attacked. As I rushed forward, Frank stepped aside as if he were a matador dealing with the charging bull. I threw a lot of haymakers that drove Vincent back up against the fence. Out of nowhere, Miss Davis appeared and held me in a bear hug from behind. Afterward, Vincent pulled down his sweater, picked up his glasses, and walked away, trailed by Frank. Miss Davis and I went inside, where she wiped my face with a wet towel. She asked why I was fighting such a big boy. I told her we were just playing around. She smiled and said, "Maybe you were playing, but he sure wasn't." Escaping adult eyes was the backdrop of a training ground for fighting in and away from school. In street fights, fairness was an abstraction of moronic dimensions. It could get you killed. I learned from others to fight dirty, to cheat, and look for angles, openings, and mistakes. The prime rule of fighting was this: there were no rules, anything goes. In time, I found ways to cut an opponent down to size. If I lost a fight, he better be prepared to fight me daily. Either that or suffer the consequences of being surprised. Most opponents weren't willing to go the extra mile. To them it wasn't worth it, but to me it was. Fighting became my modus operandi for payback. Had I been aware of another reasonable and face-saving choice, I would have preferred not to engage in fistfights. Only a damn fool would do otherwise. For me, fighting wasn't done for fun. It was a survival necessity. I wasn't a born fighter. I had become one. Even if you tease a peaceful elephant, eventually it will charge at you. A man of ill repute once told me, "Little brother, sometimes the challenge to fight must be met. You don't have to be good at it. Just know that you don't have to be good at it. Just know what, how, where, and when to do it, and the rest will take care of itself." It was a thug's maxim that gave me an edge. The strangest things can happen sometimes after a fight. such as the friendship between Big Frank, Vincent, and me that blossomed after the fight. Frank and I grew to be the best of friends. He lived with his father, mother, and sister Judy, 2 blocks away from me. I noticed a sibling rivalry, but it was tame compared to mine with Cynthia. Despite Frank's size and tough appearance, he had a mild temperament. I never saw Frank in a fight or an argument in school or out. His height, stockiness, bubble eyes, and stern look probably intimidated others. But my presence was as non-threatening as a butterfly's. Most everybody looked taller and bigger, so I was a sitting duck for any potential bully looking for easy prey. Although I didn't act, look, or talk like Urkel, the nerdy character on TV's Family Matters, I could have been mistaken for that type of person because I was small, mostly silent, but I wasn't a pushover. Through my acquaintance with Frank, I was briefly introduced to the Cub Scouts and then later to the Boy Scouts. The necessary funds for my membership dues, scout equipment, field trips, and other expenses were not available to me. I understood our financial situation. My mother didn't have a dime to spare, but I had hoped to explore the Scouts' experience that was supposedly non-lethal. Who can refute that a change in my surroundings and activities might have been a life-altering experience? I admit being a little envious of Frank and other children whose parents were able to afford the Scouts and other similar opportunities. Though I felt deprived and sullen, I drew confidence by means of my ability to rebound from many childhood disappointments. When I wasn't at Frank's house, I was out hustling with James, who lived with his mother around the corner from 42nd Street. James was a short, light-skinned brother with freckles and a giant reddish-brown afro. I met him during a serious rock fight in a vacant lot that was filled with tall mounds of dirt, trenches, and tunnels where Monroe and I had challenged everybody to a battle. Though James and his posse outnumbered us 6-1, we held our own and never got hurt. Perhaps the combination of our giant homemade slingshots and chunky rocks gave us an edge. Occasionally, I would bump into James here and there, so we ended up hanging out a lot. We had one common interest, a shared social activity, stealing. James was as slick as they come. He knew the ins and outs of many local business establishments. On weekends, we would sneak on a bus to downtown Los Angeles with its smorgasbord of department stores, movie theaters, jewelry shops, and other places of business. James opened up a fascinating new world to me. Together we roamed downtown Los Angeles, bootlegging clothing, food, jewelry, and shoes. Thoughts of my mother's wrath became a distant memory the moment I replaced the black Brogan shoes she always bought me with the first pair of biscuits, a Stacey Adams style shoe often called Southern Comforts. When we weren't stealing, our handmade wooden shoe shine boxes were put to work. As a street bootblack, spit shines ranged from 50 cents to $1, with hopefully a tip to come. Our entrepreneurial skills earned us a slow $10 to $15. Eventually, a tall youngster named Paul moved to the neighborhood and joined our crew. We became the 3 Musketeers. As thugs and hustlers used to chant, all money is good money, but there are exceptions to any rule. One afternoon while we were shining shoes downtown, a substitute teacher from school, Mr. Land, showed up wanting to shine. Lined up side by side, our shoe shine rags were popping in rhythm like an orchestra of Rice Krispies, snap, crackle, pop. Mr. Land was a nice substitute teacher who often resembled the white guy with the thick mustache in the Village People, a popular singing group. Mr. Land offered to pay us to shine a closet full of shoes at his house if we were willing. Mr. Land drove us to his home near Santa Monica Beach. After he turned off an alarm, we walked through a festival of flowers to the back of the house where he lived. Mr. Land placed a gunny sack full of old dusty shoes on a chair and then left. We were shining shoes for about 15 minutes. He returned wearing a gold silk kimono. He dumped several coin bags with quarters and silver dollars on the floor in a pile, then suggested we play a card game. The game was called strip poker, an alien concept to me. Although he explained the rules, I had no intention of taking off any clothing. Mr. Lin managed to lose his first hand and disrobed until he was completely naked. The hair stood up on my neck and arms, and my eyes became as big as silver dollars. I wondered what in the world was going on here. With each trip Mr. Lin made to retrieve another bag of coins, he stuffed our pockets with as many coins as possible. He knew we were stealing the money, of course. When all the coins had disappeared into our pockets, he stretched out a nearby bed and said he'd give us all $20 to massage his back. His back was so hairy he could have been part bear.